This episode is brought to you by AudioQuest, makers of the mythical series Analog Interconnects. Click the link in the show notes for more information.
So, Srajan, we are back with another podcast.
Indeed, we are.
And we're going to talk about some relatively new hi-fi items. And as is always our brief, we're going to try and go deeper than the press release. And I'm definitely going to try and do that today because the press release that I first want to talk about is only puddle deep. And where I want to get to with my first item is I want to talk about the newly announced Sony Xperia 1 Mark VI, which is their new flagship smartphone, which they release a new one every year. I have the Mark V here. I'm holding up the Mark V. I can see your reflection there, Srajan, in the phone
yeah,
screen.
it says 1557 on it. That must be the time in Berlin.
It's the time in Berlin, nearly 4 p.m. So I've been using this Xperia 1 Mark V since last October, and I bought it, well, partially because it's one of the very few smartphones now that still has a headphone socket on the end, which I'm holding up and pointing to the camera for the benefit of people who are just listening and not watching.
3.5 mil, not USB-C. Yeah,
exactly, 3.5 mil. It does have a USB-C on the bottom. I'll come to that in a moment, actually. So, essentially, I want to talk about smartphone audio today. I want to put all of this in context where possible. Now, before we start, I know there are things called portable audio players. You and I have covered them before, Srajan, haven't we? We've done quite a few. So I know that they exist, right? And I also know that Bluetooth headphones exist. But I want to talk today to people who are interested in using wired earphones or headphones, but mainly earphones, with their smartphone to get the sort of simplest portable audio rig possible whilst maintaining wired headphone connectivity. I'll give you an example, something I've been using for the last few months. This is I'm holding up a true wireless, not a true wireless, I'm holding up a wired IEM sort of in front of my face here. This is the Campfire Audio Bonneville. This is one of their latest models. This is actually terminated with a 4.4 millimeter Pentacon plug. I'm going to get to that at the very end of this podcast. It's going to take me a while to get there, but
and it's a pink plug.
It's a pink
purple,
plug,
maybe.
yes.
Yeah.
But I tell you, one of the earphones that I use for a lot, just kind of out and about, if I just don't know what to take with me and I want a wired experience, because people say to me, "Well, Johnny, you don't really benefit from wired earphones out in the street." And I used to think like that, but I think my opinion's changed, Srajan, in that I do love true wireless. Having no wire is fantastic. But after a few months of living with a true wireless IEM and enjoying the freedom of that, I go back to a wired earphone and go, "Oh my God, that is so much better." And then after a few months with the wired, I go to a true wireless and go, "Oh my God, no wire, so much better." So I kind of flip-flop between the two. But
Can I ask, when you say so much better, when you go to the wire, what do you mean by so much better? Is it the sound?
Good question,
primarily?
yeah. There is a purity to the sound that I think you get from a wired earphone or headphone that you don't get from a true wireless Bluetooth earphone. It's not the Bluetooth, I don't think, or maybe that's part of it, but recently I've been listening to a lot of, well, I think, in the main, lossless Bluetooth, and I still kind of get this sort of weird sort of, it's like an obfuscation. It's like I don't want to say it's the DSP, but it might be. It's like this kind of processed sound. It sounds processed, right? And I don't find the wired IEMs. I'm holding up a pair of Campfire Holocene, which I've used for the past few years. I use these to edit my videos, actually, because they're great for human voices. This is a all BA design. I don't want to get into the specifics of whichever earphones I'm using, really. But I use these because they're small, they're easy to drive from smartphone devices or portable devices or dongle DACs. We'll talk about dongle DACs in a moment. But I'm holding these up as examples. Yeah, you get a purity, Srajan, I think, to a wired listening experience that you just don't get from true wireless. I mean, it's like everything, right? True wireless has the benefits and wired has its own benefits. Anyway, I'm getting way off track. I didn't want to go there, but okay.
Sorry for that.
No, it's okay. I mean, the thing is that about 8 years ago, I wrote an article called "The DAP Days Are Over." And I think I made a video along similar lines, but that was when portable audio players didn't really do streaming services, didn't have a Google Play Store, didn't operate like a phone. So back then, we started to see the first sort of dongle DACs come to market. I do have one here to hold up to the camera. I'm holding up an AudioQuest Dragonfly Black with its sort of USB tether. This is an iFi tether. Back then, I was okay with that. Nowadays, I find this a bit cumbersome because dongle DACs have gotten a lot smaller, if not better in sound quality. I mean, we could debate that forever, but this is a little FiiO KA2 that I'm holding up. That's a balanced design, so it's got a 4.4mm on it. So that's much more convenient. It's a kind of a pigtail design, right? And I've been using that more than the Dragonflies of the last few years. In fact, most of my Dragonflies are in Portugal because I use them there on my desktop. So it's more of a desktop thing for me. So...
But they have gotten even smaller, correct? Because with these massive headphones that I'm wearing now, one of the cables that's included ends in a USB-C plug.
Right.
And built into the plug, you can't see that it's anything but a standard USB-C plug. Built into the plug is a DAC and a headphone driver. Powered by USB, so you can plug that into a USB-C smartphone connector, and you have sound, even over these big headphones. And I was shocked how good the sound was from something that looked like it couldn't possibly work because it's so small.
Well, I think the best example of that, actually, I've got one I prepared earlier, Srajan, is, I'm not going to hold up an iPhone 13 mini with Apple's, well, it would now be a USB-C connector, but this is a Lightning to 3.5mm connector.
Right.
Most people in the world, I think, if they're using wired earphones, will use one of these. And this is the sort of the benchmark against which I sort of judge most wired portable experiences. Yeah, there's a debate as to whether the DAC is inside this little connector or whether it activates something inside the phone that connects to the internal DAC that's actually used for the speakers, because there must be a DAC for the speakers in this phone. I'm not quite sure, but it's still very small.
Give me a moment, I want to show you something.
A few moments later.
So for the benefit of those people that are only listening, I'm showing John a cable that looks like USB-C to USB-C, except this is a normal USB-C plug. This part here has the DAC and the amplifier built in.
Right. Things are getting crazy small, right?
It's getting crazy small. And the performance is unexpectedly good when compared to a 3.5mm output that's preceded by just a regular op amp, an amplifier on a chip to drive headphones.
I mean, that's mostly what we kind of experience with smaller devices. I mean, it's maybe what we kind of experience with phones. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned chips because that's important. So my next thing I want to hold up, I've got to get these right. So in the wake of the sort of arrival of the OG dongle DACs like the Dragonfly in 2016, so 2017 gave us, I'm going to hold this up, this is a phone here. This is an LG V30. Now, all the boomers watching will know this because they love this. It's a very boomer-friendly phone. The reason is because it's got a headphone socket, but not just any headphone socket. It has something called the quad DAC inside. Now, they don't make this anymore. LG have exited the phone market. They did so in 2021, I think. But this was not the first. There was a V20 before this, but this is the V30, tuned by Bang & Olufsen, which is on the back here. But this phone sounded amazing. Still sounds amazing. Really, I mean, in the context of phones, so at the time you were talking like maybe the last one with the headphone socket was the iPhone 6s Plus. This, which is what I owned, this was much better. And I think lots of people are clinging on to their sort of LG V series phones. I'll explain why in a moment. I've got
sort of like a phone with audiophile sensibilities, right?
Exactly that. And the LG V40 was my next phone after that. I think I was given the V30. I bought the V40 because I just thought it was so good. So normal Android phone, pretty good camera for the time, even though now the camera looks a bit long in the tooth. But the reason why I think these these phones sounded so good is because they were using ESS chips. Now, these are ESS chips where the DAC and the headphone driver are on a single chip, right? So it's one chip that does everything, DA conversion and headphone drive. So an integrated circuit, if you like, really. But I think I had some information on which ones were used where. Yes, so inside the V40, there was the ES9218P. Inside the V60, which I don't have, which came later, was the ES9219. Now, I'm not wanting to be a chip spotter here. The point I want to make is that LG made the point of telling the public what audio chip is doing the headphone drive and the DA conversion, right? So I guess if you've got something good, you as a marketing department, you want to shout about it. You want to tell the public. And they did, and these phones sounded good. Although over on Reddit, I was Googling this morning, some people on Reddit reckon the V60 is not as good as the V40 because I don't think it was tuned by Meridian. So it's LG's own sort of tuning. This is the modern word that I don't really understand, but I will use, right? Now, the reason I don't use these phones anymore is because the operating systems are out of date. The camera isn't up to the standard that I want to use because I take a lot of sort of, well, just spontaneous photographs really for Instagram, and now it's videos, and these just wouldn't cut it. In fact, I did an interview, or a series of interviews in Munich in 2018 with one of these phones, and I slapped it on uber wide because I got somebody very close to me, and it just looks horrific. And when I see it now, I'm like, my God, I can't believe I thought that was an okay thing to do. And it's not just the wide angle. It was just everything just looked so mushy and pixelated. It was awful. Anyway, so that's why I don't use those phones now, even though if I want to play music through them, they sound bloody fantastic. I mean, really, really good. And when I say bloody fantastic, I mean as good as you say, as maybe even better than a dongle DAC like the Dragonfly, maybe on par with your FiiO KA2 dongle, those kinds of things, right? So better than your average smartphone. Now, we're getting towards Sony now because Sony have been making something called the Xperia 1, which is their flagship model for many years. Last year, they introduced the Mark V. I bought one in October, so my Amazon purchase history tells me. And I bought it not just because it has a headphone socket, but because it does lossless Bluetooth via this Snapdragon Sound chipset. I think we've talked about this before. But it also has an amazing camera. It has a color scheme or color grade called Cinetone S for mobile for when you're taking video. So a lot of the B-roll for my Munich video this year, not all of it, was taken with this phone. And it was much better than the Google 7 Pro that I had in years past. But I've made a video about this. I'm not going to labour the point. This headphone socket on this Sony phone, no matter what I do with the settings, it sounds weak. It sounds just a bit tepid. I did write down some notes about this. In that, where are we? Yeah, you know when you pour like a juice drink, but it's from a concentrate, and you put
if you don't shake it, you get all the weak stuff first, right?
Well, yeah, but even if you just don't put enough of the concentrate in, it tastes too weak, and that's how this sounds to me. It is quite detailed, and it's, I guess you call it, I won't say it's treble forward, but it's kind of like transient forward. But the crucial thing is there's not a lot of bass weight. It's kind of lean from the waist down. I mean, the bass is there, but it's, it does do Dolby Atmos. I was listening to some Dolby Atmos through those wired Campfire Holocene headphones a couple of weeks ago. I didn't even know that. I plugged it in and played a Dolby Atmos track from Apple Music, and it came through as Atmos and sounded bloody great. But that still doesn't correct the lack of bass weight. And for me, even like this FiiO KA2 dongle sounds better than the headphone socket built into the Sony phone, right?
Now, can I ask, what kind of price are we talking on this Sony phone?
Okay, so that's a good question, because these Sony phones are mega money. I think they start at generally about 1,400 euros. So if I could get any other more affordable Android phone and then just plug in a USB dongle DAC like this FiiO, I've got a better sound. It doesn't have to be this FiiO. It could be any reasonably good dongle DAC. Like I say, I don't really use the Dragonfly anymore because it's too cumbersome. Even though a few years ago, it's amazing how your baseline shifts over time. So I guess we have to ask now, well, why doesn't the Sony sound very good? Now, I don't know, because Sony doesn't say what chip is doing the DA conversion and the headphone drive. So if there's nothing to talk about, it means it's probably they don't want to talk about it for a reason. My best guess is the Snapdragon chipset that sort of powers the entire phone does everything. And it does the DA conversion and the headphone driving from that single chip that does the screen and everything, right? I mean, there's a GPU in there as well that does the screen, but generally it's coming off an off-the-shelf thing. It's not built with audiophile sensibilities that the LG series phones were with the ESS Labs ESS Labs DAC chips and headphone chips. Now, at the same time, at the very start of this year, because I knew it was going away, Asus have a phone called the Zenfone, a series of phones. I bought something called the Zenfone 10. I'm holding that up now. It's blue. It's got a little camera array on the back. It's a smaller phone. It's similar in size to the iPhone 13 mini. So I'm holding both up, right?
How many phones you've got?
Oh, Srajan, I've got just a ridiculous number of phones. It's just insane. But I got this because I wanted to see how good the headphone socket was, and if it was good, I was going to make a video about it. It isn't very good. So I didn't want to waste another chunk of money getting all out to film it and making a video. But it's not. It's a bit like the Sony. It's just a bit tepid. It's just a bit I like the phone itself. I now use this for the phone that we use when we're doing all the filming stuff, so I don't have to use my own phone, because very often messages come through and alerts come through and spoil the shot. So this one, I don't have that problem, I don't think.
Now, when you say the sound is kind of tepid, is this in reference to the LG, or is there another current smartphone that you know of that would trounce the Sony on sound?
We are going to get to that, Srajan, at some point in this podcast. That's where I'm headed. But the great thing, the other reason I bought the Asus Zenfone is because it does the aptX lossless via Snapdragon sound. Because at the start of this year, I'd got 3 true wireless IEMs that all did aptX lossless. And I was having real problems trying to get it to engage, or so I thought. So I thought, it's my Sony phone. There's something not right with it. I did email a couple of manufacturers. They go, we don't have this particular model of Sony, so we can't test it. So that's why I sort of panic bought the Zenfone to see if it could solve my problem. It didn't. It turns out that the whole aptX lossless story is a can of worms, which I did make a video about. And those true wireless IEMs, I will make videos about those eventually, but the whole aptX lossless thing really kicked me sideways on what I thought would be a fairly straightforward investigation, and absolutely was not, and cost me money to buy these additional phones. It was kind of irritating, really. So anyway, the Asus Zenfone has got a headphone socket. It and the Sony, I think, are maybe the last two of the big names to make a phone with a headphone socket, and they don't sound great. Now, audiophiles who kind of get taken by what I call wishful thinking will say, oh no, it's rubbish, it sounds amazing. No, it doesn't. If you put it next to a dongle DAC or a portable player, or even, here we are, here's something else, right? I'm holding up something called the Go Blue by iFi. Okay. It's a little sort of matchbox size thing. It's a Bluetooth DAC, right? So you pair it with your phone over Bluetooth, and it has 3.5mm, 4.4mm. This, I love the sound of this. It doesn't matter that the Bluetooth is lossy, because it does LDAC, which is almost lossless, but not quite. This sounds better than, better than the FiiO dongle DAC in some respects. It has a bit more bass weight. There's a setting for it on here as well. It has a nice little volume wheel. I've used this loads. So I would urge people not to be put off by the Bluetooth nature of these things, because the DAC and the headphone driver chip, or if they're all in one, that matters much more to what we hear than the codec or the transmission mechanism, unless of course you're using really sort of heavily lossy compressed files or lossy compressed Bluetooth connections. But even with an iPhone, it sounds pretty good. Not quite as good as an LDAC Android, but not far off. I realise I'm talking a foreign language at times here, Srajan, for you, because I know you don't do this stuff, but I'm trying to move quickly so I don't eat a load of time in this podcast. But anyway, so what all of this taught me, the Sony, the Asus, the LGs, is things like that, is that if a manufacturer won't tell us what kind of chip is doing the DA conversion and the headphone driving in a phone, you can bet pretty confidently it's not going to be very good. So when Sony a few weeks ago announced the Xperia 1 Mark VI, so the new version of my Sony phone, I was like, okay, I wonder if they've improved the sound quality. And it was pretty hard. I did speak to a Sony representative, and he didn't know. He said, oh, well, we're going to have to ask Japan about that, and never came back with a satisfactory answer. Somebody on Reddit posted a video in Japanese which shows basically a PowerPoint slide of how Sony's made some improvements to the audio circuit, which, you know, I kind of believe. But crucially, in that slide, it's the audio chip, right? The unnamed audio chip. Because, sorry, I need to wind it back a little bit. When I was talking to the Sony rep a couple of weeks ago, I said, look, do you have a dedicated audio chip that's doing the DA conversion and the headphone driving, or is it all coming off the Snapdragon core chipset? I got no answer. Nobody said. It's almost like I'd asked a completely alien question to Srajan, and anyway, it was a bit frustrating. But this slide, the chip is labelled as Premium Audio IC, which again, if it was an ESS Labs or an AKM or something we would recognise, they would say so, right? Yeah. So it could be premium, it could be one of their own, but it could be equally just off the Snapdragon sound core processing unit, right? So my best guess is I don't think this new Sony phone is going to sound much better than the old one. And even if it does, that much better isn't going to make much of a difference to where it will sit in the broader context of Bluetooth DACs, dongle DACs, LG phones, because I know a lot of people are still using these LG phones, and they're looking for the next phone that will give them that experience, right? But with a more sort of up-to-date operating system, camera set, just all round, just a 2024 design, really. And I'm going to come to that in my second part of this story, right? Mm-hmm. But I guess I would urge people to guard against wishful thinking. Is just because it's the only phone that has a headphone socket left on the market, I'm talking about the Sony here, really, or the Asus, doesn't mean it sounds any good. Anyway, over to you, Srajan, for your first one.
All right. I have a 2-for-1 coming up, and it'll make sense in a moment why I'm actually mixing up two different brands and products. Mm-hmm. I'm first going to talk about a product that you and I reviewed and both of us really enjoyed. Remember that South Korean Platinum VC1?
Yep, I do, yes. So we're talking about a stand mount loudspeaker, which had it was a metal box, right? It was an aluminium. Is that right? Aluminium, Srajan?
Aluminum.
Yeah. Or aluminum, if you're in the USA, you get slightly different metal. We're talking about was it a 2.5 way or a 2-way? I can never remember. It was a tweeter in the middle, right?
So it's a dual 5-inch Diapolito-looking monitor with dual rear-firing ports, and then there's a deeply inset small AMT between the midwoofers. Mm-hmm. And it was called the VC1 for virtual coax. And the 01 suggested that we'd soon see a VC2. And the VC2 now is here. And the VC2 is what you would normally call a bass extender or a bass spin. Mm. And it looks like a truncated pyramid. It's very, very tall, and it gets narrow towards the top where it meets the monitor. So the two of them together look very much like a YG Acoustics. And the bass in there is an 8-inch driver. So far, so ordinary. Why am I talking about it? Well, because there also is a 1-inch wave-guided beryllium tweeter. Your look says it all, because now I'm going to hold up my new little Irish friend.
So your little Irish friend is a little kind of, it looks like a fridge magnet. Is it a fridge magnet? Uh-huh. It says for fox's sake.
And it shows a little fox.
Little fox, yes. It doesn't say the word fox, yes.
Right.
So how does this relate to beryllium tweeters, Srajan? Where does this beryllium tweeter even live? Is it in the basement?
The beryllium tweeter lives above the 8-inch woofer at the very top of the bass bin, looking at you, the listener. right below the lower midwoofer of the monitor. So why would the bass bin have a 1-inch beryllium tweeter, right?
Very bonkers as far as I'm concerned, yes.
What the company tells us is they call this their harmonic tweeter. And it kicks in at 25 kilohertz.
Okay.
25 kilohertz and above. It doesn't do anything below. So it is a super tweeter.
But it's, okay, so if I'm going to play devil's advocate here, Srajan,
Please do.
most people would say, well, you can't bloody well hear above 20, so what's the point of that? Well, I know the answer, but... Yeah.
No, that's why I'm bringing this up. Because there's a number of theories or potential pseudo-explanations of what a super tweeter will actually do. Now, the company call it their harmonic tweeter. They don't call it their ambient tweeter. It's firing forward. So now let's talk about harmonics, which we did a while back when we talked about harmonic distortion.
Yep.
So if we take a 1 kilohertz tone, the bass tone, the fundamental, within 4 octaves above that tone, we cover its first 16 harmonics. So between 1 kilohertz and 16 kilohertz, we hear 16 different harmonics. And as the harmonics go up in number, they always go down in amplitude. Which means if the second and third harmonic are quite faint, by the time we get to the 10s and 11s, we're talking like super faint. And then we're getting into, barely audible territory. So if a 1 kilohertz tone with its first 16 harmonics only goes up to 16 kilohertz, an ordinary tweeter is still covering. You don't need a super tweeter. Right? And what is the highest fundamental that an instrument can play? How high can we even go before it's all just overtones? Do you know?
I do not know this.
There's 3 instruments that can go as high as an instrument can go. One is the piano, one is the violin, and one is the flute. And I'm going to look at my cheat sheet to give you the proper numbers. And the numbers are...
I would have said...
The violin goes to just above 3 kilohertz.
Okay.
The flute manages 3.4 kilohertz. And piano goes just above 4 kilohertz. Now, if you ever have heard a piano's higher tones, they become really tinkly. And it's very hard to distinguish a timbre. It's high, but it gets very rarely played because it's actually not that pretty. It sounds pretty harsh. So it's actually quite rare in music to have any sounds that go up to 3 kilohertz. Go ahead.
There's something I want to add here, is that 3 kilohertz region is where many, but not all, crossovers sit between, say, a mid-bass driver and a tweeter in a two-way. Some of them go lower, some go higher, but in the 3-ish kind of region, that's where they tend to cross over those drivers.
Correct. But now to call a tweeter that starts out at 25 kilohertz a harmonic tweeter, I'm going to hold up my Fox again.
For fuck's sake.
Because to me, at least, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
Now, curiously enough, this Platinum 1 and 2, the monitor atop the bass stand, it was shown at the Exponent show. And the stereophile reviewer was in the room, and they were demonstrating for him the effect of the super tweeter, because you can turn it on and off, and you can adjust its output amplitude.
Right. So
and you and I will...
Hang on, but before you go any further, so basically, if it does nothing, as many people would claim, as we don't hear above 20, if it does nothing, we would hear no difference when it was turned on and off, right?
Yes, and that would be sales prevention 101.
Yes.
If you're trying to sell a customer a feature and then you can't demonstrate its effect, you just kill the sale.
Yep.
So you and I, everybody that's reasonable listening to this right now will know that you will hear a difference. Now, we may not be able to explain why, and we may not necessarily be able to explain what it is that is causing the difference. The stereophile reviewer said it was not night and day, but it was very obviously more and better ambience. Ambience is the sense of space, and a lot of the ambience takes place in very, very high frequencies. So if, for example, you had a two-way speaker with by-wire binding posts, and you pulled out the cable that was feeding the midwoofer. So if we just listen to the tweeter, especially if it's crossed over at 3 kilohertz, like you and I just talked about, it's shocking how little information there is. And if you put your ear really close, most of what you will hear is like, it's like a sizzle, like a faint sort of hiss, like you're in between radio stations, reduced in level. And every once in a while you will hear a remnant of the tone. But interesting enough, when you turn that hiss off, something really goes amiss. So calling it an ambient tweeter would be for a lot of manufacturers who have a tweeter that fires in the back. They don't call it a super tweeter, they call it an ambient tweeter to enhance the spaciousness by not just firing forward. Which now brings me to my 2-in-1, to the second product I want to talk about, because now I'm going to get to 2 more theories about what it is that we are hearing with the super tweeter. At the Munich show that you just came back from, Fyne Audio, which is a Scottish brand that is sort of revived Tannoy with a lot of the original engineers who were not happy when Tannoy moved offshore and became Chinese owned. They regrouped under Fyne Audio, and at the show...
Hang on, though. We should point out that Tannoy is still in operation, still going.
Absolutely. It didn't replace Tannoy.
Right.
It's operating in parallel.
Yes.
At the show, they introduced the SuperTrax. And the SuperTrax is another super tweeter. But this one is basically a beautiful looking plinth made out of solid walnut with inlays. And then they have an upfiring carbon composite tweeter with a little metal grill above. And on top of that, facing down, is a lens, a dispersion lens. So the tweeter fires up, immediately sees an obstruction that's like an inverse horn, and it's now radiating 360 degrees, and it doesn't have to sort of first hit the ceiling. It does it right away. Now, Fyne Audio give an explanation of what they think a super tweeter actually does. 2 things. They say that any roll-off in bandwidth, let's say 22 kilohertz minus 3 dB is how far our tweeter goes, that will incur a phase shift. And that works like a low-pass filter. So just by virtue of pushing out how far a tweeter will extend before it breaks up, you avoid the phase shift in the high frequencies. It's not that you suddenly can magically hear beyond 20 kilohertz. It's also not that you're listening to CD and there's a brick wall filter at 22.1 kilohertz and there's nothing even recorded beyond that. No, it's that the phase shift has now been pushed out of band more, and the information that we do hear is more phase coherent. They say that is one explanation or theory why super tweeters are audible. And the second one, please.
Well, this is what you've just said is exactly pretty much how Peter Como of IAG, who designs the Wharfdale, the Mission, that kind of thing, explained it to me. It's all about the filter. It's not opening up the sunroof on above 20 kilohertz. It's just pushing out where the filter starts to roll off. So, yeah, as you say, the phase shift that takes place in the audible band, so below 20, is fundamentally changed.
It's upshifted, so it's no longer affecting the audible band.
Yeah.
The second theory or explanation that Fyne Audio give has to do with power response. And so now let's take a pie chart, right? So we have a round circle. And at base frequencies that are long enough to wrap around the speaker cabinet, the whole pie chart is completely full. We have 360 degrees sound. As we go up in frequencies above the Schroeder frequency, we get to what's called half space. So now only half the pie chart is full. We hear sound that's going in front of us, and it's going to the sides of the speaker, so it's hit our side walls. but the frequencies are not, the wavelengths are not long enough to wrap around and engage the 360-degree full space. And as you go up further in frequency, the dispersion narrows even more, and now our pie chart now basically only shows one single slice.
Yes.
And that's what we mean by power response. That in the low frequency, the entire room has a pretty much even distribution of bass. No matter where you stand, you'll hear bass. As you go higher up in frequency, the bass will remain, but the mid and high frequencies will diminish. And if you stand behind a speaker and you listen to the high frequencies, you will hear very, very few. And so now if you have an up-firing super tweeter that suddenly restores 360-degree dispersion in the high treble, you have a more even power response of the treble in the room. And that would definitely be audible. And that has, again, nothing to do with being able to hear beyond 20 kilohertz. It has to do with changing the radiation pattern of the high frequencies, which of course does not apply to the Platinum VC2 with its 1-inch beryllium tweeter just facing forward. That also is a very directional transducer that only has the advantage of going up to 60 kilohertz, whereas the AMT probably dies at 25 kilohertz. So they're just adding a little bit more extension, but they call it their harmonic tweeter. Fyne does not talk about harmonic tweeter, they call theirs a super tweeter. And they talk about phase shift and they talk about power response. And that's basically what I've got on the subject of super tweeters. What do they do? How might they work? Do they have an effect? And if so, what might the effect be? I have tried them, and I've had the best results with the Omni version. ELAC has an Omni ribbon, which is called the 4-pi, and 4-pi stands for whole space, for full space. So it's a ribbon that radiates Omni. And then I had one from Frank Cheng in Paris, which, like the Fyne, is an up-firing beryllium or diamond dome that goes into a dispersion lens. And the diamond dome doesn't break up until like 80 kilohertz. And again, we can't hear that high, but now we're really pushing the phase shift so far out of band that we should hear a benefit.
I'm going to double stress this actually, that we're not saying that these things produce sound above, or rather we would hear the sound that they make above 20k. We are not saying this, right, Srajan?
No, we're not.
And I think it's
certainly not response. You and I at our age. We are lucky if we go out to what, 17 kilohertz?
Yeah, well, I think it's 17 the last time I had mine tested, or 16 and a half. But irrespective of that, I mean, people, I can just see the comments now, people going, well, you can't hear that high. But we're not talking about that. No. We're talking about phase shift from filters and power response, right? So these are the two reasons why super tweeters can make a difference. The other one that was suggested to me by Peter Como was that basically the crossover from the super tweeter to the normal tweeter sometimes isn't done properly, and you can get a peak at, say, 17. And that gives the illusion or the impression that there is more detail or more treble information when it's just a peaky top end. So.
But now we should also say that if these explanations are correct, then if you do have a tweeter that might be beryllium or carbon or diamond that is good to 40 or 60 or 80 kilohertz, that already is the super tweeter. It already takes care of the phase shift. So now the only thing that it does not take care of is the power response. It's still a beamy transducer, and if the power response being more even in the treble is beneficial, then that still wouldn't be sufficient. You would still want an add-on unit.
Right.
Now the things that we would have to watch out for with add-on units is their sensitivity. Because, for example, the Fyne audio claims 98 dB sensitivity. So if I had a Platinum, and let's just arbitrarily say that it's 85 dB inefficient, and I now stuck a super tweeter on it that is 93 dB efficient, we see an obvious imbalance. There will obviously be too much fizz and fuzz. They're on the very
Too
top.
much up there, yeah. Yep.
So we then would need some kind of provision to sort of tame that down. And that's why most quality super tweeters that are external, that are meant to be added onto existing loudspeakers, they will have an adjustment. And since you can't make a super tweeter more sensitive with a rotary, you always start out at the top efficiency and then you knock it down.
Right.
So the Fynes start out at 98, and then there's multiple adjustments, -3, -3, -3 dB, probably going all the way down to 87. So you can find a match with the sensitivity of your main loudspeaker.
But you can't adjust the frequency at which they roll in, can you?
I believe on the Tenor you cannot. On the Frank Chang that I tried, you could. It had high pass filters at 12, 16 and maybe 18 kilohertz, which always sounds unusually high because that's nearly already outside of the range of our hearing. But very often they are very, very shallow slopes.
Right.
So the idea is that you don't want to come in too sudden and then you create this sort of huge increase. You want to make it a very, very gradual sort of coming in that you barely notice.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, it is like a subwoofer, but at the other end. So you have a gain and a frequency crossover point optionally, and then you kind of just try and fold it into the mix.
And very often what you might notice, just as with a subwoofer, is that the benefits or the changes are not exclusive to the bandwidth that you think you're addressing. So with a subwoofer, it's like, okay, more bass. Hello. But very often it's actually more than that. Right. Very often that you actually hear more spatial information, even on recordings that apparently don't contain any low bass to begin with. That's a very common observation, that sort of this 3D sense and the sense of layering and image specificity and the depth, it gets more accurate or more defined. And super tweeters can have a similar effect. They can sort of change the precision whereby images seem to focus. And again, I have no idea exactly how it works. And the explanations I just gave are just theories that I've heard other people propose that seem sensible. But at the end of the day, theories are nothing that we can hear. It's like we have to try it out. And if it makes a benefit to us that we can afford, then we might want to add it. If we can't hear it, no need to spend the money.
Exactly that. Go and try one out for yourself. Or don't, you know, it's just... Yeah. Okay. Is it back to me, Srajan?
Exactly, it is.
Oh, goodness me. Okay, so we're on this sort of phone trip, and you asked me previously, well, okay, John, if the Sony's no good and the Asus Zenfone is no good, what should we buy? Well, okay. So there is something that came out... Oh, I've got the box. 1 second. So about, 2 months ago, this phone started shipping in China. I'll read out what it says. I mean, I'm holding up the packaging of a phone. It's got some...
It looks like a manga girl from Japan, in fact.
Yeah, this is not something I know anything about. This whole world of... I mean, I call them cartoons, but I guess that's kind of doing the art a disservice. But anyway, it's that kind of style of packaging. But on the box in the top left corner, it says Moondrop. So this comes from a company called Moondrop. Moondrop introduced a portable CD player at the end of last year, but they told me that supplies are kind of running low, so I don't know whether they're having a challenge making more. I don't know. But anyway, this phone, it's called the MIAD-01 or the MIAD-01, and MIAD stands for Mobile Internet Audio Device. So it doesn't say smartphone, which is kind of interesting, but it is a smartphone. Anyway, I'll put the packaging down. I will show you the phone, because I've been using this a little bit for the last couple of months. No, not even that long. 4 or 5 weeks. So I'll hold up the phone. You can see
that is a monster.
The artwork continues to
that is big, isn't it?
Well, it isn't. It isn't. If I hold it up, I mean, I'm sorry for the people that are listening. Next to the Sony, it's about the same size as the Sony.
Okay. For some reason, with that artwork on it, it just looked really tremendous.
Well, it's that, and also the screen is curved at the edges. It sort of falls off like a waterfall. Okay. So it's a curved screen. Do I have any information on that screen? I didn't want to get too much into the specs because I want to concentrate on why I'm talking about this. But I'll tell you some things that I don't love about it to start with, right? So the shape is kind of weird because on the back you've got a camera bump, and the back is made of plastic, so it's a little bit cheap. I'll come to the price in a moment, or maybe I'll save it to the end. So it just feels it doesn't feel as nice in the Sony in the hand. The camera quality, so the photos and the videos, very basic. And to Moondrop's credit, they say so in the promo materials. They're like, look, this is just a basic camera. It is nothing more than that, so don't get too excited. So, okay, that's fair enough. I've used it a couple of times. It's okay in good light. In low light, it's pretty weak. Talking of weak, the speaker on the bottom. A lot of tech reviewers, when I say tech reviewers, I mean people that review phones and laptops and things like that, they tend to talk about the sound that comes out of laptop speakers all the time. I'm like, why are you doing this? They're all just a variation on shit. Apart from the MacBook is the best kind of shit you can get, but then none of them are really good. So if you're playing, I know lots of people play music through laptop speakers and phone speakers, but that's not this world that we're talking to today, Srajan. So I'm going to put that in proper context. Laptop speakers are crap. And phone speakers are crap. Apparently, on the new Sony phone, they've improved the speakers. I don't care.
Who cares?
Like, I'm going to use Bluetooth earphones at the very minimum if I'm watching something that I really want to kind of get immersed in. Anyway, what else? Because this is a Chinese phone, it doesn't come with the Google Play Store activated out of the box. There's no Google Play Store on the phone, but you can go into the settings, one click, and it starts appearing, and then you have to install all your apps from there, including, I installed Google Maps. I couldn't get Google Maps to work for me. I don't know why. Maybe I've clicked some privacy setting somewhere in the settings, but when I click like the button that says, where am I right now, it can't find me, which is probably a good thing. Because I use Google Maps on my phone a lot when I'm going out on my bike and whatever, so I'll need to fix that once I start using this full time, because I think I will eventually. Haptic feedback. When you're sort of typing on it, it does vibrate, but it feels kind of squishy. It's not crisp. It's not a crisp brr kind of thing. It's kind of basic, but it's not a deal breaker. And also, this ships with Android 13, where most phones now are Android 14. You can see, I say you can see. You and I, Srajan, and people who are watching can see. People who are listening can't. Can see like the theme on this phone is very orange and black. I haven't gotten around to changing it. It's okay. I don't love that necessarily, but if you're into that kind of sort of manga art or whatever you call it, I really don't know what it's called. I'm sorry. I know that makes me sound like an old man, but it's not my world. Like, it's just not me. Anyway, those are all compromises that I can live with, right? I would say that the camera quality is probably roughly on par with the LG phones from a few years ago. Maybe it's a bit better. Maybe I'm doing it a disservice. Maybe it's a bit better. But I would say that the Sony phones and the Asus Zenfone sort of beat out this Moondrop phone in the sort of the haptic feedback, the screens, the speakers, the in-hand feel. So all the sort of everyday use cases, you can tell why the Sony phones sell for like $1,400, the Asus sell for like, well, that one was $700, but I think the new one's like $900 or $1,000. So this doesn't have the feel, this Moondrop phone does not have the feel of a flagship phone, right? So why would you buy it? Well, that's because this is an audio-centric phone. So on the top, I'll hold it up for the people that will benefit the people watching.
You've got 3.5 and 4.4 mil, right?
Yes, you've got 3.5 mil and balanced 4.4 mil, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a DAC circuit in here, and Moondrop, it's kind of weird actually. I asked them, what's the DAC circuit? And they went, we hope you understand that we can't tell you, but then it's on their website. I'm like, so maybe they misunderstood my question, but it's basically a pair of Cirrus Logic chips that are doing the DA conversion. And I guess, I've got a screenshot in front of me on my notes. It says dual flagship DAC, Cirrus Logic, Master Hi-Fi, right? And there's some other stuff on their website if you want to have a look about a 6-layer audio circuit, which I guess sits somewhere behind the camera bump, maybe. I guess it's in there somewhere. But the important thing here, Srajan, as I mentioned earlier, is that Moondrop have stipulated what's doing the conversion, what's driving the headphones, but because it's got 4.4, you kind of know that they're paying attention to the sound quality of headphones coming out of this device, right? Now, things that we also might want to know as a wired headphone listener or a music listener is that it has a micro SD card slot right behind the SIM card tray. So the Sony phone has that. Not many phones nowadays have them. iPhones certainly don't. So that's quite useful if people are like you, Srajan, where you want to put all your library or some of your library onto a micro SD card, plug it in and forget about it. That ain't me. I'm never doing that, but I would use that extra space for offlining content from Tidal, Apple Music, Spotify, all the services that I use, Runark, Plexamp. I've used them all on this phone. I took this phone to Munich with me, just using it in the day-to-day. Didn't do any video on it, though. I might do that eventually down the line. And I've been using the Campfire Holocene with the 3.5mm plug, and the Bonneville. I'll hold those up once again because they have a nicer cable that doesn't jangle too much. That's the Bonneville with the pink 4.4. There is a 3.5mm in the box, but I did notice that these Holocenes sound noticeably better when powered balanced from the 4.4mm socket. So even if you're thinking, well, I think my LG phone will sound just as good as this Moondrop, no, it won't. Not in the balance mode. It's kind of a closely fought thing, 3.5mm. So I would say that maybe the Moondrop is a bit more. It's a bit warmer. It's not quite as separated as the LG in terms of layers. But the thing I love most about the Moondrop that the LG phones don't have, and none of my dongle decks have, it has this kind of weighty, beefy bottom end. It sounds glorious. It kind of gives you that heft. You feel like you're kind of engulfed in the heft. It's just, I think it sounds terrific. Even if it isn't what many people would call, well, they call it accurate, I don't know. But it's hard to know, isn't it? Because when you've lived with devices for so long that are kind of lean and mean in the bass, how do you know that that's not just a deficiency of everything else? And when you get to the Moondrop, you're back to what it should be. But I would say that the Moondrop is probably a little bit weightier than most portable players that I've used. I've got the Aslan Kern SP3000. Sounds glorious. Absolutely amazing. But it's a brick and it's heavy and it's a second device. And its software implementation of Runark still needs fixing. So I don't love it and I don't use it day to day for that reason. I'm one of those people, I think I've come to terms with this, is that I want my phone to be my audio device. I know there are people who aren't that, but I'm talking to people who really do have an interest in a phone as being they're all in one. And I'll tell you why, actually, is because very often I'll sit down in the morning with a cup of coffee, I'll be flicking through my newsfeed, and very often it's like there'll be suggestions of music and things like that come up. And I want to offline that music immediately. I don't want to have to go like, where's my Aslan Kern player? Oh, he's upstairs or it's in my bag. No, I just got the device in my hand, I flip over to a different app, go to Spotify, go to Apple Music, offline, and I've got it to listen to later, and I don't kind of go, oh, I'll offline that later and then forget. So that's the advantage of having an all-in-one as far as I'm concerned with this particular phone. So, yeah, it's meatier and fleshier than the FiiO dongle DAC, than the iFi Bluetooth DAC. It's probably not as... I was trying to think of the word. I think the word is speckless as the the LG phone. Not quite as clean and precise, but not by much. But that is more than compensated by the kind of the heft and the whomp you get, the sort of pendulous weight that kind of lends music a sort of... It's not a punch, it's just that kind of forward momentum, you know, of just maybe that I have physically myself, you know. But, you know, yeah, one more thing. This is the important thing, right? The most important thing, Srajan, which I think we're going to ask for, right, is how much? How much is this Moondrop phone? Well, I'm pleased to report it's $400 US.
Crikey.
Right? So even if you were to get a cheap, normal Android from, I don't know, whoever, and whack on €100 dongle DAC from FiiO or somebody else, iBasso or whoever, then your phone needs to cost $300, right? So it's all taken care of by this. Now, I know some of the grumpier members of our audience, Srajan, they'll already be writing it at their keyboard. You know, there's no way I'm buying any phone from China. No way I'm buying from a Chinese manufacturer, or all that kind of stuff. If that's you, no one's forcing you. You don't have to. I mean,
don't buy Apple.
Well, I think you could make the argument about many different. I mean, I know that certain phone companies have been. Is it Huawei have been pulled up by the USA for certain irregularities? I'm not across the ins and outs of all this because I don't. This is as far as I go into mobile phones normally, Srajan. It's just the audio component. So if people have reservations about what might happen on a phone like this, I would say this actually. I would suggest that Google is harvesting far more of your data than any Chinese phone manufacturer ever would. I mean, it's horrifying what I voluntarily give over. But anyway, just as even as a proof of concept, even if this is not the kind of thing you would ever buy, this proves that it can be done for not very much money. And when I say it can be done, I mean make a phone with audiophile sensibilities and cut the corners where audiophiles might not really care, like in the camera. I mean, I love the camera on my Sony phone, so I feel a bit torn here because I would love a better phone in this Moondrop, and I would pay for I would love a better camera in this Moondrop, sorry, and I would pay for a better camera in it. And even if it cost me $600, I would still be very happy. But I think it's great that it sounds so good, and we don't have to go out to our little dongle DACs and our portable players to get there. I don't think this is available very easily in traditional stores. I think you have to buy it from sites like Alibaba, is it Hi-Fi Go or something like that? There's a bunch of different Chinese websites. So you're going to have to import it. This one came to me direct from China, from the manufacturer. They sent it to me. And it starts up in Chinese and you just have to click the button and click English and off you go. So, yeah, I just think that's super interesting, if nothing else.
And so it would be the audiophile's phone, or sort of like a DAP with complete telephone and camera functionality. And for somebody that is primarily a phone listener who wants completely up-to-date graphic interface and camera facility, it would be more like a second choice.
Yes, definitely a second choice in those respects, which is why I think they've called it a mobile internet audio device or something like that, because it's, the camera on it is basic. But if you just want a few happy snaps, I guess that still leaves the question of, well, why would I upgrade from a Sony to this? Well, you get a more contemporary operating system why would I upgrade from an LG? My brain is going. Why would I upgrade from an LG to the Moondrop? Well, you get a more up-to-date operating system, so Android 13. I think the LGs are stuck on Android 10. They're not getting any updates. It doesn't necessarily mean they are a security risk, but eventually, after a few years, some of the streaming apps might stop working.
Right.
So it just moves you along. I mean, if you ask me which one I would pick, the LG or the Moondrop for sound, I'd pick the Moondrop every time because I like the bass weight that it gives me. But which
is phenomenal considering the asking price. It really is.
It's a really good price. When it was announced, I was like, "What? Really?" That's why I asked for one. I thought that's fantastic. So, I mean, we know where the corners have been cut in the terms of bill of materials, so people can decide from there. Srajan, I think I've spoken enough. It's back to you.
All right. So I have a new brand. Mm-hmm. From Switzerland. And what's interesting is that the gentleman who owns and operates it left a competitor who he worked with a few years ago to do his own thing and become independent, and then went back to the competitor for his design work. So the company is called Basel Acoustics, and the owner is called Piotr Misiewicz, a Polish chap, who used to work for Bonneville Audio.
Okay.
And really wanted to become his own player in the high-end audio scene. So, on very friendly terms, left to set up his own enterprise. Then when it came to, well, who's going to design my first two loudspeakers, only had one choice in his mind, which was to approach Sven Bönicke and ask him to be a contract designer, which is exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. And so Sven Bönicke showed in Munich. He showed this big, very expensive W22 flagship speaker. Mm-hmm. And right next to it sat the, what do they call it? The V01 from Basel Acoustics, which is sort of like a downscale W22. It's a floor stander. It's narrow. It's an 8-inch two-way. The baffle is sloping back. At the very top of the baffle, we see this 8-inch driver. And then on top, there is like what we would usually call a bullet tweeter. This one looks like an ice cream cone on its side. So the pointy end of the cone is facing back, and where the ice cream scoop would be, there is a 2-inch metal dome. It's a tweeter, but it's an unusually big tweeter. Firing out the back is the conventional 1-inch silk dome tweeter. Below it is a slot port. The speaker is made out of solid wood, like all classic Bonneville speakers are. It's then also available in the classic Bonneville finishes, which is ash, cherry, walnut, and which one did I forget? Hello. Oak. Ash, oak, cherry, and walnut. It's available in a natural finish and also available stained black. And below the driver, going all the way down to the bottom, is fabric. So the sides, the top, and the back are wood, exposed wood. And then in a modern sort of nod at maybe Scandinavian design, they have a very nice looking fabric. The crossover between the 8-inch driver and the 2-inch tweeter is at 1.5 kilohertz. In typical Sven Bönicke fashion, it's a very shallow phase correct first order. The slot port is tuned to 27 hertz. So this is for all intents and purposes a full range speaker if and when used in a room that's appropriately sized, not something absolutely humongous. And the unusual thing is that both the 8-inch custom paper cone midwoofer and the sort of ice cream cone on the side that's sitting on 2 small stalks, they're mechanically decoupled. So if you push on that tweeter pod, it will move. And if you push on the driver basket, if you push it in, you will feel a little bit of a give. So there's very effective mechanical decoupling between the drive units and the enclosure. Very similar to if you were to put like rollerball isolators underneath the speaker and then you touch the whole speaker cabinet and it will sort of roll back and forth. This is built in and it happens between the driver and the cabinet. And a lot of people may ask, well, wait a minute. If the driver makes sound pushing forward, shouldn't it push against something that doesn't move?
Yes.
And Sven said, yeah, you would think that. He says, now go back in history and go to the ancient catapults that the Romans built to like sack cities and throw massive rocks, right?
Yeah.
Those catapults had a pivot. And the pivot was on a sled. And that pivot moved while the catapult was swinging. And he said that invention meant that whatever projectiles the catapult was shooting, they were flying further when the pivot was allowed to move, when it was not stationary. He said it's exactly the same principle. And then Sven explained to me, well, people keep asking me, don't I lose energy if I decouple the driver? And he says, yes, I do, but only below the resonant frequency of the driver, which is where I don't use it anymore. I cross it out already. And he said the benefit is that the driver's mechanical energies, the kinetic energies, now can't migrate into the cabinet and then kick back from the cabinet back into the driver, which of course would be time delayed. And he said, when you sort of cut that sort of two-way traffic of mechanical energies, he said a lot of garbage is removed from the sound and the 3D imaging gets significantly better. So from Basel Acoustics, we have the VO1, which was introduced at the show. They will update their website by the middle or late June next month to show first dealer and distributor listings. The retail price is going to be 12,800 Swiss. Not cheap, but considering what an equivalent Böhnecke speaker would cost, it's lower. It looks very attractive. Now that I haven't figured out how to do the screen sharing, somebody will have to go on the website, baselacoustics.ch. It's a very attractive looking speaker, comes in 4 different finishes. There is a bigger one already announced. We don't have any details on that yet. And there already is a teaser tab on the website announcing cables and electronics. And the idea is that in the not too distant future, you will be able to assemble a pretty much complete system, all from one brand. Who will design the electronics and cable? I don't know yet. But the next bigger speaker will also be designed by Sven Böhnecke.
Okay, so I am operating by the seat of my pants here, Srajan, because I wasn't actually planning to talk about this today, but I will, because I think it's actually quite interesting. So I want to talk about Marantz. I mean, people generally know Marantz as this very storied Japanese manufacturer, now Japanese manufacturer, makes these kind of hulking great components that, they make a statement, they make a visual statement, and there's no ignoring them, right? I mean, if you've got a Marantz amplifier or CD player or something in your room, it's unlikely that you can ignore it. But this week, actually, they have announced something called the Model M1, which is designed to be almost ignored. It's a little black box about the width of, it's narrower than a laptop. So it's
like a Mac Mini?
Yeah, a Mac Mini is a good way to describe it, yes. It's like a Mac Mini sized black box.
Oh, a WIM, right?
I think it's a bit bigger than a WIM. Bit bigger than a WIM, yeah. So it's a streaming amplifier. It's very understated in its design, so I think it's got a plastic wrap and then a grill mesh on top. I'm not sure the material of the grill mesh because I don't have mine yet. It's coming next week. But if you've played with a Sonos amp or if you've played with a WIM amp, it's similar kind of functionality in that you can stream to it and then it will drive your loudspeakers, right? So this is essentially, the way I see it, this is Marantz trying to take a slice of the Sonos market, as WIM are doing and Blue Sound and others, right? So I guess it's not, when I first saw this presented, the first question I had from Marantz is like, well, why would you buy this and not the Stereo 70S, which is a full width, you call it an AV receiver, but it's only stereo, right? But I had one earlier this year. I thought it was great because it put all the sort of now playing information on your TV, no matter what you were playing. And that's, I think, standard in the home theatre world, but it was new to me in the sort of hi-fi space. Anyway, this doesn't do that. This is a different thing. It does have an HDMI eARC, though. It does have does it have a Toslink input? Yeah, it has a Toslink input. It obviously has Ethernet and Wi-Fi for your streaming. And then it has a line level input as well. But that's digitized. I'll come to why in a moment. In fact, no, I'll explain that now because it makes more sense, right? So all the streaming arrives digitally. The line level input is digitized upon entry because the signal needs to stay in the digital domain from entry pretty much all the way to the exit point. Because this is a digital amplifier.
It's like a power DAC.
Yes, it's a power DAC, exactly, right. So and this is always a bit of a misnomer, isn't it? Because there's no DAC inside, right? That's the whole point of these things. There is no DAC. So in a standard Class D amp, there'll be a DAC in it, right? So this is how you can tell the difference between a normal Class D amp and a digital amplifier. There's no mention of a DAC inside a digital amplifier because there isn't one. And I think this is smart because Blue Sound did this with the Power Node Edge. Because if you're building a product for below $1,000, the type of DAC chip that you would be able to afford to put into that product is going to be of lower quality, and also the DAC circuit you build around it is going to be of lower quality. So there's going to be a compromise made there. So if you keep it digital from front to back, and then have the digital signal switching the output stage, which is how these digital amps work, then you forgo all your DAC circuitry and things like that. So obviously, I just spotted a typo in my notes. Obviously, this is not for somebody who wants a Class A B Marantz, right? If that's you, this ain't for you, right? This is not for you. This is a completely different direction for Marantz, both visually and I think topologically. So Lingdorf do this as well, but at higher price points. But they
And
also
NAD probably, right?
do NAD.
Do they have a direct digital amp?
I think they might do, but if they do, it's escaping me right now, which is kind of embarrassing. I should know these kinds of things, but I can't remember. I just know the Blue Sound Power Node Edge is one of those. So it offers 100 watts per channel into 8 ohms. The press release didn't give a 4 ohm figure, so I asked.
130, right?
125 into 4.
Okay.
So, and for people that kind of, I know the people that get hung up on high-res audio, especially DSD. Yes, this does do DSD, and it does high-res up to 24,192. Personally, I'm much more interested in what the circuit does to the sound before I worry about any sort of high-res compatibility, because it matters more, but okay, fair enough.
How about smart bass management? Does it have that?
Yes, it does. So there's a subwoofer output on it, and so with the app, you can set the crossover point. But interestingly, what Marantz have done here is they allow you to set the high pass and the low pass independently of one another.
Oh, brilliant.
So if you want to put a little hole in the middle, you can. Or if you want to kind of put a peak across the two, you can. I guess with greater power comes more of a pain in the arse factor to try and cross it in, right? But I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're stuck, you just put both on 80 and work from there. I mean, I guess the position of the sub is going to matter just as much. I mean, subs are great, but they are sometimes a pain to sort of integrate into a system, into the room. And there's also some gain trim on the amplifier or the sub output level as well. So you can do most of it from the listening position, because it's irritating when you have to kind of get out of your chair, change the gain, go back, sit down, listen for a bit. It's annoying. Now, where this product, I won't say it comes unstuck, but where it's going to meet stiff competition is on the software side, because it runs HEOS. Now, HEOS, I'll say it now, it's not my favorite streaming platform. It's kind of like, they've revamped it recently to make it a little bit more like Sonos, a little bit. But I'm very much of the mindset of, I will use Roon, even Apple AirPlay, Chromecast, just basically any third-party streaming system before I'll use the manufacturer's own. Because generally I find the manufacturer's own comes up short in terms of, well, I mean, I've done Roon to death, like the magazine layout, and basically bringing the digital audio library, the files to life, right, in a sort of book type format. And everyone, as far as I'm concerned, including Blue Sound, including Sonos, is playing second fiddle to Roon, and to a lesser extent Plex and Plex Amp, but I'll talk more about that later in the year. I mean, Spotify Connect. I think a lot of people use that. A lot of audiophiles use that, and they probably don't talk about it very often. Tidal Connect. I think Tidal Connect is coming to this device eventually, but it won't be, well, it might be there at shipping date, but I think the shipping date is next week, I think. And Room Readiness is not on board yet, but it will come eventually. But what I'm saying is that if you put this next to a Blue Sound device, which I will, you've got to consider the sound quality and the general sort of form factor usability, but what's the software like? Because I know that Blue Sound does Cobas, which is very important to many people, not me, but it does Cobas, and HEOS does not. So immediately you've lost your Cobas customer unless they already do Roon. So I don't know. I just think that HEOS has always kind of been it's been pedaling uphill, always, right? Ever since I was there. It was developed in Sydney. And they took the press round, and I think it was 2013, maybe 2012. So it's been around for a long time. The recent update makes it look better, but it doesn't make me any more inclined to use it, because if I can use Tidal's own app, Spotify's own app, Apple Music's own app, that's through Chromecast or AirPlay, then I'd rather use those than a manufacturer's supplied app. Right. If I ruled the world, manufacturers wouldn't give us an app to play music just for the settings of the device. That's it. And I guess we should talk about price. So it is going to sell for $1,000 US, 900 British pounds, or 1,000 euros. So it's sort of, in the Blue Sound world, it's between the Blue Sound Power Node Edge and the Blue Sound Power Node in terms of pricing. It's on par with the Sonos amp. I don't have a Sonos amp. I think the Sonos amp is great, but I still think that the Blue Sound devices sound a bit better, and functionally, I think they're quite a bit better. But
well, I would say that, at least theoretically, what the Marantz has over the competition, possibly, is just the brand DNA and cachet. That they're coming from more of the high-end market. They had Ken Ishiwata being the famous tuner, so they have an established reference of what's possible when you're allowed to spend more money in R&D and throw more money at parts. So if they now decide to try to bring all of that down market on price and jump into the waters with a direct digital amplifier, you might assume that, well, they're going to compare it to what they do in Class A/B. And they couldn't possibly come out with something that is going to get really embarrassed in that comparison.
I mean, I guess I would say that Marantz have an ace up their sleeve in this department. So yes, this M1 or Model M1 has been tuned by the Soundmaster. So the new version of Ken Ishiwata in Japan. So yeah, they will have obviously listened to it and put it up against maybe the Stereo 70S and other Class A/B designs. This is not Marantz's first Class D-esque rodeo, because they're one of their, I think it's like this, I'm going to get this wrong. Is it the Stereo 50? I forget what it's called now, but there's a $5,000-ish, $4,000-ish integrated amp that's Class D that sounds very warm. So that tells you that you can voice these things in certain directions. But here is the killer blow that I think this product has, that the Sonos doesn't have, the Blue Sound doesn't have, and most other products of this price doesn't have. This is not made in China. It's made in Japan.
Oh.
So all the people who were sneered at the Moondrop phone a few moments ago will be like, oh, it's made in Japan. So because Japan's okay, right?
Now, it didn't used to be, but it's okay now.
It didn't used to be, yes. Taiwan didn't used to be, but I guess it's the cultural shifts. I don't want to get into the politics of it all, because it gets very ugly, and people accuse me of, well, just stick to talking about audio, John. Don't talk about politics, which, okay, fair enough. So, but I think, I don't know, a lot of boomers, they're going to love the made in Japan angle. I think a lot of young people probably might be a bit more pragmatic about it. But I think that is a very important feature that I put it in my headline because I thought that was huge. But we'll see. We'll see how this plays out. I am getting one pretty soon. So yeah, it's just it's for your nice low board, and then 2 stand mounts or a nice pair of slender floor standers or whatever to power those for a discrete hi-fi system that doesn't take over your entire room. Because I tell you, Srajan, having come back from Munich again, I can't even look at those rooms now that have wall-to-wall hardware, because all I hear in my head is all the audio files that say it's all about the music, and they've got a wall-to-wall of hardware. Yeah, it's just like, is it though? Is it really though? So I just, it makes me shudder. It's like, ugh. So I mean, in Munich this year, I didn't go anywhere near those. I just didn't bother. I mean, I think I went to the Wharfdale space because there was something specific I wanted to see in there. But as for the rest of it, no. Just me and a whole wall of gear. I mean, right behind me right now, I've got my USM Haller sideboard, which I'm showing off. You can't really see, I have to move my microphone. And I've got a lot of gear on there. I've got 2 Audiolab pieces. I've got a Grimm and a Cambridge Audio. The TV is off because it flickers on this camera. So, but normally that would be on. But that's a lot for me to have between the speakers. That's an awful lot. I don't normally have that much gear in plain sight when I'm looking at it. So the Model M1 Marantz is for somebody who doesn't want to look at a whole bunch of shit. So, yeah.
Okay, I got 3 more things, but 2 of them are like just 2 sentences each. Okay. So the first one is that a while back we talked about PSI Audio and their active bass traps.
We did.
I have them. I've tried them out. They do exactly what it says on the tin. The news item is that now they come also in white.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And that's a cool thing, because you're supposed to put them into your room's front corners behind the speakers. And in a domestic environment, you most likely don't want to see them, or see as little of them as possible. And with most walls being painted white, they disappear a lot easier than if they were black.
Correct.
That's the end of that news announcement. The second one was a nod at you in Berlin. I want to give a little plug to the gentleman that makes these, Camerton Audio.
Oh yeah,
these flagships called the Binome ER, and this is a new finish. It's all silver.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has a sort of matching gray-white Alcantara finish, which is why I'm wearing them. Gray and gray, I thought that'll sort of look good together. And now I get to my third announcement. It's just a little bit longer. Is that the Polish guys at Cube Audio, who are famous as sort of being the Polish version of Voxative, in that they make wideband drivers with wizard cones. They have a new flagship. And what they've done this time, they previewed something similar a year ago at the Poland show, because they also have active subwoofers. But a lot of people don't like the idea of buying a rather big box speaker and then still having to add a sub to get the kind of bass that they want. So Cube Audio have been experimenting with a 1.5 way that would put a woofer into the same box. The one last year was still showing a side-firing woofer. What they introduced at the Munich show now is the 1.5 way with a new 10-inch driver on the top, a widebander that is running completely unfiltered all the way down. And then of their own make and design, they have a matching 10-inch woofer made out of the same cone material and the same surround material. And that comes in at 6 dB per octave at 300 Hertz. So the upper driver runs full range, and then very strategically, the bass driver adds a little bit of weight and fullness, and then is there fully for the lower octaves down to 25 Hertz. And there's one smart, unexpected feature on the back, which is the 3-pole rotating adjuster. 3 positions. Position 3 is the direct pass-through to the widebander. Nothing in its way between the amplifier and the voice coil. Position 2 adds a resistor that will shelve off the widebander by 1.5 dB. And position 1 adds another 1.5 dB. So what that basically is, it's now
I'm
a
sorry.
passive bass control. The people
I'm laughing because your cat needs feeding.
Yeah, it definitely does. He says you're over time.
Yes.
But so even though this control is on the widebander, by padding the widebander down, we are automatically increasing the relative balance of the bass.
Yeah.
So this is a passive version of building in some room adjustability that allows us to tailor the bass balance to our room.
Gotcha.
And the speaker's size is very, very much the same as their previous flagship called the Nenufar. This one is called the Lotus 10, and the retail price, hold on, 21,000 euros a pair.
Oof. Okay. Well, we can't always be doing cheaper stuff, Srajan, that's true.
Well,
Yeah,
you started at 400.
I know. It will always be me that's probably covering the more affordable stuff to counterbalance your spendy nature.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Is that a wrap, Srajan?
That's all I've got.
That's all I've got.
All right, then.